You described that in the book, you know, that like a long time ago, people didn't think of time in the way that we think of it now. You know, it wasn't like there was this constant feeling of there's not enough of it. Yeah, maybe
Right.
describe that for me really quick. It's just like the contrast between now and then and how we think of time now versus in history.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's lots that have sort of gone wrong in the way we think about time, and I'm sure we'll come to that. But there's this kind of fundamental, basic thing that you're referring to there, which is maybe not something that's gone wrong, but it's a particular way that we think about time today that is so endemic, so second nature that, you know, we're like fish in water. We can't see that that's what we're doing, and that is just this whole idea that time is like a thing separate from you in the first place, that you can either use well or use unwisely, or waste, or get more efficient or productive with, like as a resource. You get this idea cropping up as far back as sort of ancient Greece and Rome, but I think that if you had sort of walked up to a English medieval peasant, you know, in early medieval times in England, and talked in these terms, it would have made no sense at all. These were people, and this is true of all sorts of cultures at different points in history, these were people who, like, time was just the medium in which life unfolded. Anthropologists call this task orientation instead of time orientation. So it's a way of living where the rhythms of life just emerge from what you got to do in your life, right? And you're so sort of closely tied to nature and the natural world that you just do things when they need doing. You don't have this sense in your head of like some kind of calendar or a timeline or a yardstick or some other kind of spatial metaphor, and you're trying to keep up, or you're waiting for something to happen. You know, all those kind of ideas that we have, and the idea of being sort of hounded by time that so many of us feel today, they're all premised on this notion that like there's time and there's you, and you're in some kind of relationship. And I don't think that idea would have occurred to, for example, a medieval peasant, right? If you had, as a productivity guru, had gone up to a dairy farmer then, or even to some extent a dairy farmer now, and said like, you know, batching tasks is the way to be super efficient. So why don't you do all the milking of the cows for the next 6 months in a couple of days? Like, that's not how it works. You just got to milk the cows when they need milking. And, you know, in those sort of traditional societies, almost everything just needs doing when it needs doing. And there are downsides to that, a lack of autonomy and freedom, I suppose. But the big upside is that you're not in a kind of alienated relationship with time. You're not like, am I using it well enough? Am I going to have enough of it to fit in everything I need to do by Friday afternoon? All of that is just not on the table to begin with. And I think it's a much more peaceful way of being in time. Although there were, you know, other than that, you don't want to go back to the life of an English medieval peasant.
Sure. Yeah. Yeah, I agree. But yeah, I mean, I think this strikes me so much personally. I've been told my whole life, and I know it about myself, is just like efficiency is something I'm probably unhealthily obsessed with in my own life. Of, you know, if we're basically like, you know, my wife and I will be leaving the house, and we're going to walk to somewhere down the street or somewhere around the corner. And to me, it's like, I have to open Google Maps to find the quickest route. And then like in my mind's turning like, well, is Google right about this, or is there a faster way? Like, this is just my curse and how my mind thinks. And that, you know, that kind of expands beyond just little instances like that. It's just kind of how I see the world. And in a way, I've learned over the past few years, disease is a wrong term. Obviously, it's not clinical or anything, but it feels like some sort of curse or disease for my life's well-being, in a sense, because, you know, in a lot of ways, I've tried to expand my mindfulness, meditation practice, things like that, to really kind of bring me back to the present moment, because I'm always so obsessed with the future. My relationship to time is oriented to the future, just always. So it's really hard for me to be here now, and that's a hard, not very fulfilling way to live. I've had those nightmares of, you know, the classic stories where people are on their deathbed and they're like, I wouldn't have wanted more time doing work. I would want more time with my family and friends type scenarios. Like, I've had that nightmare, and like, I've spent so much time the past few years like, cool, how do I get present? How do I, you know, change this? How do I go back to kind of that, to your point, the peasant way of thinking of my relationship to time? I'm curious, in the modern world, you know, and maybe this is something you can speak to, how do we get back to a better relationship with time when the demands of life, or our perceived demands of the world, are the way they are? Like, what are some things we can do to not live so much in the future and think about our time as like this thing outside of ourselves, but to be a little bit more present state with time? Like, what did you learn about that?
Well, this really gets into what I think of as the sort of core message of the book, but it bears saying that, like, you know, everything you talk about there is like, me too. And you don't end up writing a book like this unless you've had all those same struggles. And frankly, not only had, but I'm not going to even claim that now I'm in some kind of perfect relationship with time. And we can talk, there's lots in the book about how that sort of focus on efficiency per se is really counterproductive. I don't think there's anything wrong with making certain processes in your life more efficient, but pursuing efficiency for its own sake has a lot of pitfalls. But I think the basic problem that it's sort of universal, but I think in people like the way you describe yourself, and in me, there's a particular kind of flavor of it. It's that we're trying to get ourselves into a position of being in control of our time and sort of mastering our time in a particular sense that is, you know, spoiler alert, is not possible, that you actually just systematically can't achieve. So this is, you know, if you're pursuing a productivity approach with the idea that one day you're going to be able to stay on top of everything, that there's going to be, like, you know, any goal that comes to your mind or obligation that you feel you're going to be able to execute by definition, or that you know how your future is going to unfold because you've planned things to within an inch of their lives, and you just have a whole plan for how the year is going to unfold, and you're going to hit all your targets and meet all your goals. Or I would say, in the case of like Google mapping a route somewhere, like that feeling of certainty that you're not wasting any time because you know 100% that you're taking the most efficient route. All of these, I think, are manifestations of trying to get a certain kind of control over time, which the psychological root of is basically not wanting to face the fact that time is limited, that time is going to win the battle in the end one day, and that we can't control the future that much. We can't come up with a system that will make us capable of infinite productivity and infinite, completion of tasks, because we are finite. So there's always going to be tough choices. There's always going to be stuff you can't do if you're going to do something else with that finite bit of time. So there's this kind of deep sort of need to feel like you are on top of everything, and like you have got your life sorted out, that we never actually get to, but we're constantly thinking it's like next week or next month, or maybe if I like put in a lot more effort over the next 6 months, I'm going to finally sort of lever myself into this position. And I think it manifests in lots of different ways. But one of the messages of the book, I guess, is like when you see that things like that are impossible, not that you just haven't got there yet, or that you haven't found enough self-discipline or the right techniques, but that actually there's a certain kind of goal here that isn't just not on the cards for human beings. That is actually one way to start to fall back into a much healthier relationship with time, right? Because I'm trying to think of a way to make this a bit more specific and vivid, but like if you think that you are going to be able to complete 20 really major projects over the next 6 months, and you're constantly struggling to try to feel like you are in position to do that, then you're going to be distracted from whatever project you're working on. You're going to be constantly trying to game your schedule in some cunning way. You're going to constantly feel anxiety and stress because you're going to be looking down the pipe that actually there isn't enough time for all these things. If you sort of can admit defeat, in a sense, I know that sounds sort of pessimistic, I don't think it is. If you can sort of admit defeat about the 20 projects and see that you're going to have to neglect many of them, it's actually a lot easier then to find absorption in doing and making progress with 2 or 3 of those projects, and actually getting somewhere, being sort of in the experience instead of constantly in this sort of try to get out of the experience in order to do these sort of air traffic control with your schedule and try to figure out if you can do everything. So it is a kind of defeat. It's a kind of a surrender to the reality of the situation, but I think it's a defeat that is the prelude to greater productivity and greater accomplishment and greater fulfillment, right? It's not a recipe for despair. It's like, stop trying to do impossible things with your time so that you can do really cool, possible things with your time, I guess is the overview.